Welcome back to yet another video, guys. I enjoy being out here working in the woods. Just, lets my mind wander, and I kind of treat this channel a little bit, like a vlog. I like to talk about what's on top of my mind, what I'm doing. And right now, I've had some conversations with some buyers recently that really frustrates me on the mentality of the forestry industry here in Ohio. And ultimately, because of this, really the landowner ends up winning. But I think long term, it's going to really hurt everyone. I think the whole industry is not headed in a healthy direction. And talking to a lot of these guys, the mentality has changed when pricing a woodlot from looking at the woods, looking at the trees, looking at the current market. I got a big old spider on me right now. Got that thing taken care of. From looking at what's in a woods and pricing it according to what the lumber markets are, you have this shift ever since COVID from that to what's it going to take to buy this woods. And to elaborate on that, the competition here in Ohio for timber, and I want to specify when I'm talking, Ohio, I primarily am talking about the, northern and eastern three quarters. If you get down to the southwest corner, there's, it's the demand is not quite as strong. It's more representative of some of these other states, but the demand here is so incredibly stiff due to the sheer amount of buyers in the area. And so what has, essentially it comes down to there's a shortage of timber for a lot of these buyers. Coming out of COVID, the lumber prices went through the roof and guys made money hand over fist. All the timber that they had bought up over the previous year, they bought at lower prices. And so now they're cutting this timber, getting double what they thought they were going to. And, guys made absurd money for a couple of years there. And then the lumber markets on the back of COVID just fell through the floor, just dropped. And now, they had the reverse of that. They, for a year or two, had been buying timber at crazy prices. And now those markets dropped. And guys had bought this timber at really high prices, and now they had to cut it because the contracts were coming up. And there were, I was talking to some guys that every load that was bringing into the mill, they were losing money on every single load, but they had to cut it to keep work for their operators and for the crews, and didn't have much of a choice. And now we've entered this weird phase the last 2-3 years, and probably more 2 years. It's been this weird thing of the lumber prices, have more stabilized, but they're not where they had been pre-COVID. And you have these landowners that saw those COVID prices and are not willing to sell it for what, guys should be buying timber at given the current lumber prices. And so what ends up happening is you have guys buying timber on basically zero margins and just breaking even. And then you throw in the tariffs, yet, first of the year here, it ended up really actually not causing that much of a disruption, but enough that, people were a little freaked out. And it's just been this weird time in the market where the mentality has shifted from these guys just looking at, if buyers overall would just all look at what they can get for their lumber and price their jobs out accordingly. And yes, it's going to end up being less to the end consumer, to the landowner, but to be able to have a sustainable industry, that's necessary. And that's just facing reality. What's happening right now is it's artificially propped up by all of this demand for lumber. There's so many companies out there with so many crews, and there's frankly a lot of guys going out of business because for a couple of years now they've been running, without making any money. And this is just going to continue if the mentality does not shift from I'll pay whatever it takes to get this piece of timber. And this is especially true for nice timber. And I'm seeing it on my jobs. I have the ability to even cut out, my own timber if I would buy a property, and theoretically should be able to get more for it. And I run the numbers and it makes no sense. Like, it makes no sense for me to take the time to go in and cut it myself, do everything myself. I can get as much money out of it by just selling it through my sales, the way I've been doing for landowners for years now. And it doesn't make any sense. It's just what it comes down to. And it's going to, I think, really hurt this industry long term, because you're going to continue to raise expectations of these landowners to unrealistic levels. And you're going to just continue, it's not changing the lumber prices, because there continues to be supply coming in because they're overpaying for it, but they're not making any money. And, I understand there's this sort of mentality among landowners that, oh, these mills just screw people over. And trust me, there is that happens. But, as a whole right now, these guys are just running on razor thin margins, barely being able to do anything. And I think long term, it's going to really hurt everybody involved. It's going to put a lot of guys out of business. And then, the supply is going to come down, and eventually that will, bring up demand again, just because, there's not enough supply being hit. And that on a micro level happened with walnut. Because of the tariffs, a lot of guys stopped cutting walnut for a while because they weren't sure what they're going to do with all their exports and stuff. Well, now the demand for that walnut is through the roof. I got guys, calling me left and right wanting walnut, and it's, there's pretty strong demand. And so, over the long term, over the industry as a whole, I can see that happening again. But, I think the healthier move would be if timber prices standing, to purchase would reflect the lumber markets. And you would think there'd be a correlation, but there isn't. Often there isn't, or at least not as much as there should be. And so, again, I just wanted to put this out there just for guys to understand what's happening here in this industry. It's a very tight-knit industry, not a lot of information out there. And, a lot of guys don't understand why, putting these sales out the way I do, to them, it's okay. If I just put enough money on this is a guaranteed sale. The landowner will sell the timber. Whereas the amount of times people go out and quote price timber, and we're dealing one-on-one with the landowner, there's tire kickers, and they just don't really end up selling the timber. Or it's, a buyer needs to go look at 10, potentially a bunch of pieces to actually get one to sell. Whereas here, when I put out a sale like this, they can just, look at the sheet. They know exactly what's there. They can come out, they can place a bid. And if they, place it high enough, they will get the timber. But it does frustrate me that the pricing isn't more reflective of the overall lumber market. And I would say it's not as bad as it had been. I see it correcting itself a little bit. There used to be, a year or two ago, you'd see a lot of just absurd bids where guys just way overpriced stuff because they needed the lumber or the timber. And I don't see that quite as much, but the overall pricing that I'm seeing is just still really high. So I hope you guys enjoyed, hopefully, you got a little bit of an insight into the industry here in Ohio. And I want to, again, reiterate, I'm talking about Ohio. Things may be different where you're at. I don't want to generalize across the entire industry, but that's what I'm seeing right here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll see you in the next one.